all distinguished doctors across the country who have joined for this webinar. I just want to bring the brief introduction about Dr. Div Prabhat, who is HOD for ENT Department, Wadia Children Hospital, Mumbai. Not only that, he is a attached consultant to many prestigious hospitals of Mumbai, like Jaslok Hospitals, Raja Fortis Hospital, Bhatia Hospital, Mumbai. To his credit, more than 4 ENT books he has written. So he is a distinguished author in the field of ENT, and very famous ENT book, Practical ENT, is known to most of the people in ENT faculty. He has been international guest speaker to many conferences. The very important one, the IFSO World Congress of ENT, Sydney, and Cairo and AAO in Washington. So very distinguished international speaker, very renowned Indian speaker, and he is with us today evening to enlighten his understanding on ear examination. So I request Dr. Divya Prabhat to give his insight to the all doctors across the country. Dr. Divya Prabhat.
Thank you, Dr. Ajay Gar, for the introduction, and we'll welcome to all of you on this Sunday evening, Easter Sunday evening. We are in the midst of an unprecedented situation, but that shall also pass through. Friends, we'll be today discussing or talking over examination of the year. Now, whenever you see the year, a year is not only the year itself, it is a part of the ear, nose, and throat. And that's why ENT. And to note this fact, to think of a structure, a hollow tubular organ, which is the eustachian tube. It is this eustachian tube that connects the ear, nose, and throat into a single functional unit. So whenever you have any complaint of the ear, it becomes mandatory to also examine the nose and the throat. So you cannot see the ear in isolation. It has to be taken in unity or unification. So remember the eustachian tube. Now, regarding the ear for a layman is just the pinna or the auricle outside. But as medical personnel, we know that the pinna hardly plays any role, any function. But whenever you find a parent coming with a child with a deformed pinna, they are distressed. It's like an emergency for them. The thing that you have to inform them is that this does not need that attention, but it is the hearing or the deafness that needs attention. Now, why does the pinna get deformed? As you know, the pinna forms from the first and the second branchial arches. These are 6 hillocks which get together to form the pinna. So it's a developmental anomaly of the first and second arch that leads to a congenital pinna, which you see in both these pictures. What we want to know is whether the inner ear has formed well or not, whether the hearing is normal. So for this, we need to do 2 investigations. One is a CT scan, which gives us an idea about the 2, 3, 4 turns of the cochlea, whether the cochlea has anatomically formed or not. And secondly, we ask for a BERA, which gives an actual physiological movement of sound from the inner ear to the brainstem. So these are the 2 investigations that are necessary. And as far as the shape of the pinna is concerned, which is normally the first concern of the parents at that time, you have to counsel them that this is normally done after the age of 10 or 12 years. The pinna is reconstructed by grafts taken from the ribs, and you have to wait till that time so that the ribs become much stronger. The cartilage is not that soft or pliable, which cannot be otherwise grafted. So this is a procedure which is done in 2 stages, and it involves at least 3 to 6 months. So it is priority for correcting the deafness, while cosmetic correction can wait to a much later date or to any date. The next thing that you see, once the pinna is formed, in front of the pinna, there may be a small dimple or a pit. And this pit, again, is a congenital slight malformation between the first and the second branchial arch. If there is no symptom, leave it alone. A person can live throughout life without any concern. However, at times it may throw pus discharge, there may be recurrent infections, there may also be an abscess formation into it. The moment these things occur, they need to be treated. Again, in children, commonly oil insertion has been a long standing tradition, and this commonly leads to furuncles of boils into the ear canal. And boils into the ear canal are very painful. The moment you move the pinna, the pain is excruciating, and the child would cry and it would not allow you to examine. So anti-inflammatories are given, antibiotics only if the child is febrile, and drainage if it forms an abscess. So which teaches us that nothing need to be inserted into the ear for the purpose of cleaning. There also may be small tags which are seen in front of the ear canal, and these tags are basically having cartilaginous components, but there is no connection with the ear itself. They can be again left alone, and they're removed only for cosmetic reasons. Commonly seen in boys following playing, falls, injury, twisting or slapping on the ear. And this is a collection of fluid on the pinna where the mucoperichondrium gets elevated and it forms like a seroma or later on an abscess. Needs to be drained, otherwise the cartilage would get necrosed. If not drained, it would lead to an infection and it can lead to a cauliflower ear or perichondritis. Again, now we go further inside and we come to wax. Wax, as you know, is a natural collection of secretions. It is the desquamation of epithelium, the skin, and cereminous secretions in the ear canal. And this natural secretion, as it forms naturally, it is thrown off also naturally. Ear is cleaned on its own. When we eat, we chew with force. The TM joint or the temporomandibular joint hits against the anterior canal of the ear, and that leads to a centrifugal force on the ear canal which excludes of the wax. So remember, it is important to chew your food well to keep your ear clean. The moment one uses any buds, any other instruments, it pushes the wax further inside. Whenever you see somebody with wax, you can be rest assured that the ear will not have much of infection because it contains immunoglobulins, it contains a lot of antibacterial properties, anti-lysosomal properties. So wax is a protective agent. Whenever you see wax in somebody's ear, that tells us that most probably the ear inside will be normal. Because in case there's a perforation, this will not allow wax to form. So when you see wax, you have to be happy that the ear inside mostly would be normal. So when earbuds are used, they push inside the wax, which normally is going to get thrown off on its own. So to conclude in wax, wax forms on its own, wax is thrown off on its own. It does not require any medium, example like a bud, etc., to bring out the wax. Earbuds do not benefit the ear at all. Probably they only benefit the company which makes it. Now, whenever wax is impacted or it is sitting on the drum, it requires to be cleaned, and this cleaning is called as syringing. Done in the sitting position, the water used is always at body temperature, because if you use cold water or even warm water, that would lead to a caloric like reaction and giddiness. Sitting position, because the ear is supplied by the branch of the vagus, and if that is stimulated, it can lead to a vasovagal attack. So never to be done in the lying down position. The direction of the fluid has to be upward and backward, which goes into the ear canal and brings out the wax, because direct syringing into the ear canal would further impact the wax. So the direction of syringing always has to be upwards and backwards. And finally, we remember that drying the ear is of most importance, because after the syringing done, the wax out, if water remains back into the ear, it leads to otitis externa, or it leads to fungal infection with the water. So dry the ear well. Ear discharge. Ear discharge again is quite troublesome, because the moment the first time a patient or a child has discharge, they are very worried from where the discharge is coming. And the moment when they come to you, you have to decipher whether the discharge is from the external ear or from the middle ear. Inner ear does not cause sort of discharge. So otitis externa and otitis media would be the two diagnoses that one would make as far as ear discharge is concerned. In otitis externa, the ear canal will always be inflamed, as you see in the slide. There is inflammation and movement of the pinna. When you move the pinna, it is painful. As the pinna is a single yellow elastic cartilage, and part of it gets into the external auditory canal, outer 1/3 that is. So whenever you move the pinna, it will be a painful movement. Otitis media, the canal is normal. That means there is no inflammation, there is no edema, and movement of the pinna is absolutely painless. So painless movement is otitis media, and this can clinch the diagnosis on the first sitting. So as I said, otitis externa, you would see the canal inflamed, you would see discharge, which is less profuse, but in otitis media, the discharge is more. This is otitis externa, where you can see fungal infection occurring on the ear canal, and this has classically appeared after syringing the ear where the water has not been dried up adequately. Now, another thing it is important in children to note whenever there's a ear complaint is adenoids. Adenoids are normal tissues, but a hypertrophy or an enlargement of adenoids leads to blockage of the eustachian tube and ear infection. The adenoids, not a difficult diagnosis. The diagnosis written on the face of the child. You see the face and you can see a blank, vacant expression. The nose tip is raised up, it is more obtuse. The mouth is open. The teeth are protruding in front. There is an overcrowding of the upper incisors. The palate is high arched when you open the throat. So, moment you see the face, you know that these are enlarged adenoids, and to confirm, you do an X-ray, and immediately the diagnosis is clinched of adenoids. Treatment of the adenoids becomes a must, or otitis media or ear discharge or ear infections would not clear up unless the primary source is tackled. Now, in these conditions, whether we should use ear drops or not becomes always a matter of concern. Now, if it is otitis externa, avoid using ear drops which have combinations. By combination ear drops, I mean the masala ear drops, which are having magical cures like antibacterial, antifungal, analgesic, steroids, anti-allergic, painkillers. So everything which they do really does not help, because if it contains steroids, it may lead to fungal infection. There are multiple antibiotics with ear drops will again lead to fungal infections. If it is wax, use wax dissolving drops. If it is fungus, use fungal dissolving drops. So avoid massive combinations or masala ear drops. Now, if it is otitis media, the drops that you use hardly reaches the middle ear because the ear canal itself is filled with discharge. You are not going to take the patient under the microscope, remove the discharge, and then put in drops. So as it is, the middle ear is full of discharge. The moment you use drops, the drops first of all will not reach inside. In case you can clean out the ear fully, and even if you use the drops well after that, the drops which will go inside will open the lateral end of the eustachian tube, while you want the medial end of the eustachian tube to open, because all the discharge is coming from the nose, from the sinuses, from the nasopharynx. So you're opening the wrong end of it. It does not reach inside, and many of the ear drops available, like gentamicin, etc., may be ototoxic also to the ear. Now, beyond the middle drum, we come to the mechanism of hearing, because hearing will be the most important part where our ear examination will take.
It consists of 3 sections: the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. All 3 sections work together to deliver sound to the brain. In normal hearing, the outer ear picks up sound, which it sends in waves down the ear canal to the eardrum. These sound waves cause the eardrum to vibrate. The vibrations cause the tiny hair cells inside the cochlea to move. The hair cells absorb the movement and change it into electric impulses, which it sends to the hearing nerve fibers and to the brain. This becomes sound.
So this, in short, was the mechanics of hearing, how we hear. So the sound goes from the external auditory canal to the drum. From the eardrum, which is around 30 square millimeters, the sound is concentrated onto the oval window, which is around 3 square millimeters, and that enters into the inner ear through the oval window. You have the round window, which does not have any communication with the tympanic membrane. So this sound, which is over a very large area, gets concentrated onto a small area, causes a funneling effect. It's like it may be raining on the terrace of your building and water is raining out through one small pipe. The amount of water coming out through that pipe will be much more than which is raining at any particular area on the terrace. So that is funneling effect and hydraulic ratio, where 22 times the sound gets narrowed down when it reaches the oval window from the tympanic membrane because of the large area of the tympanic membrane, as well as the ossicles, which give it a leverage advantage. So why we have gone through this is to understand the next step where testing the ear is with a tuning fork. Tuning fork all of us use. It's a part of our armamentarium. But again, I would take you through that what we basically test using a tuning fork. We check the air conduction and the bone conduction. The air conduction and bone conduction of the child or the patient. Now, this sound is tested in such a manner that you strike the tuning fork behind the ear. When the patient stops hearing it, transfer it in front of the external auditory canal. And if the sound is still heard, which means that the air conduction is better than the bone conduction. So this is a normal tuning fork test, Rene's test, positive, which infers that the hearing is normal. Now, why is air conduction better than bone conduction? Now, for the simple reason, as I told you earlier, that the sound which is coming from the drum gets 22 times accentuated, which reaches the inner ear, while the sound which is coming from bone conduction goes in as it is. If you remember, the speed of sound is slowest through air, 344 meters per second. And the moment the sound travels through a wood, it will be faster. You can put your ear on the table, tap the table, you will hear it louder. On the ground, it will be still more. On stone, more. And on ivory, the most. So But in the human body, when the sound travels through air, the speed is better and we call it normal. The reason for this is that there is a middle ear transformer mechanism. The large area of the drum, the three ossicles, they accentuate the sound 22 times what we are hearing, and therefore air conduction becomes better than bone conduction, because normally bone conduction should be better. So if air conduction is better, that means if a patient is hearing the sound better from front than behind, we know that this is normal hearing. So classically, we all hear by air conduction because it is so good, 22 times better. So the question arises that then why do we have bone conduction? Bone conduction is important or equally important because one has to modulate one's own voice according to the environment. For example, if you're sitting in a library, you'll be talking softly. When you come out of the library, automatically in the corridor, your tone will increase, your decibels will increase. And the moment you come out of the building and cross the road, the intensity of a sound will be further more. So you modulate your voice according to the environmental noise, which means that you hear environmental noise through air conduction and you hear your own voice through bone conduction. So modulation of one's voice in the environment requires both types of sound. This can be well understood in various conditions which we see. Typically, if a patient has otosclerosis or there is fixation of the ossicles of the stapes, the air conduction is down, bone conduction is better. Automatically, these patients who will come to you of otosclerosis will tell you, Dr. Saab, kam sunai deta. They are very soft spoken. They are soft spoken because they feel that the outside environment is quiet. Or a very elderly person, one may feel that this elderly person is angry with me. The reason is that they have a sensory neural hearing loss. This is presbycusis, a physiological hearing loss, where the person does not hear his own sound normally, and therefore their bone conduction is less, and they tend to talk at a much higher level. So elderly people will talk loudly because the bone conduction is low. Typically, to understand this, the two forms of sound conduction in the ear, you tape your own voice. And when you tape your own voice and you hear it again, immediately you would not recognize your voice. At the first go, you would find your voice less impressive, less charming, less resonant. But all the others would have no difficulty. They will point it out, it is your voice. So this is because you are hearing your voice throughout life via bone conduction. And when you hear it through air conduction, your own voice sounds different. So test for the air conduction, bone conduction, and we do Weber's test. Then we'll go in for audiometry, where if there is a hearing loss, we go in for the next test, which is called as the pure tone audiogram, normal conductive loss and a sensory neural hearing loss. We do the impedance test to know the pressures in the ear, the speech discrimination test. This is the audiometric room, and this is how the impedance is done. We'll just go in further. But to examine the ear, very important would be to see the ear or examine the drum. So whenever we are doing it for a child, it has to be done a little cautiously, in the sense the speculum has to be chosen the largest size, which is comfortable to the patient. Anything which is causing little discomfort, use a smaller speculum. The child is held firmly by the parent or by the nurse, and the knuckles or the back side of the palm is rested against the face, so that if the child moves in front or behind, the speculum does not damage the ear canal or it's not painful. And always to visualize the ear, pull the pinna upwards and backwards in children, and you can visualize the eardrum. Now, when you visualize the eardrum, you classically would see a normal grayish-white eardrum with a cone of light. But if the eardrum is red, congested, bulging on otoscopic examination, you know that this is otitis media, or to be specific, acute otitis media. Now, in children, the commonest cause of admission in the middle of the night of a crying child is acute otitis media, as declared by the American Academy of Pediatrics. So, acute abdomen does not feature anywhere near acute otitis media and is the commonest cause of a crying child at night. So, very important to put in the otoscope, visualize the eardrum, and get your diagnosis straight away that this is acute otitis media. However, there is no test in pediatrics, to quote one of the popular teachers, that you put the hand on the abdomen of a crying child, look up to the ceiling, and tell the parents that this is abdominal colic. But definitely there is an otoscope which you can put into the ear and visualize a congested and a bulging eardrum. So acute otitis media, as I said, is one of the commonest emergencies in children. And the reason of this is that in infants especially, the eustachian tube is short, wide, and horizontal. It's a direct communication with the nasopharynx. The child might spend a lot of time in the lying down position, vomitus, aspirates, milk will get into the tubes and affect the ears. Antibiotics, analgesics, antihistaminics would be the line of treatment. So this is how otitis media begins. Infections in the ear begin. Now, basically, the otitis media will always follow a fixed clinical pattern. This fixed clinical pattern would mean that there is rhinosinusitis. From rhinosinusitis, this leads to eustachian tube blockage. From there, the infection comes in the middle ear. There is collection of exudate, transudate. That negative pressure leads to retraction of the drum, perforation. Most of the times, this is self-limiting unless it's an atic perforation. So otitis media always follows a set clinical pattern, and most of the times it is self-limiting. This is very schematically to show you the drum, the ossicles, and the eustachian tube, and that with an infected or a blocked eustachian tube and presence of fluid in the middle. Similarly, there may be a eustachian block following allergy, following barotrauma, and since allergy has been increasing and the incidence even in our country now is doubled over the last 2 decades, you find fluid in the ear where there is no pain, there is no congestion, there may be air bubbles in the ear, or there would be fluid in the ear which is causing a hearing loss or a conductive hearing loss and a sensation of something, movement inside the ear. And any travel, air travel, was really troublesome for these patients, as well as even going in high speed lifts to towers and all, again, are damaging. So for these fluid in the ear, which is called as serous otitis media, again, a very common cause of delayed speech, where children, since they do not hear, they speak also late. A grome or a ventilation tube is used, which is not only draining the fluid, but it oxygenates the middle ear, which helps to open the eustachian tube because it clears out all the carbon dioxide. And the best part is that the grome, if you see after a month, 2 months, 3 months, it moves to the periphery. And with the peripheral migration of epithelium, the grome is thrown off with wax. Now, grome insertions help to treat delayed speech. It prevents the ear from going into further diseases like the formation of a cholesteatoma. And it's a self-extrudable tube. It's made of an inert material which does not cause any reaction. A very, very common surgery. In fact, in many of the Western countries, it's the second commonest surgery done in children after circumcision. Then again, cleft palate is always a problem with otitis media. As we are aware that since the palate they have a megapharynx, the medial part is deficient. The tensavilla palatini, levitavilla palatini do not have insertions, so the eustachian tube remains open, and that leads to infections, mucus into the middle ear, and typically nearly 50% of these children suffer from glue ear, hearing losses, etc. So if otitis media is not treated adequately, or the source of infection, whether adenoids, tonsils, sinuses, whatever, is not adequately under control, it leads to the sequelae is a large central perforation. So large central perforation leads to a conductive hearing loss, requires antibiotics, antihistaminics, and if it does not clear, a tympanoplasty is done. X-ray, you can see that with recurrent otitis media, there are no air cells in the mastoid, and this is called a sclerotic mastoid. If it is a normal ear, you can see air cells typically behind the mastoid, and this is a pneumatic mastoid. Pneumatic is where all the air cells are clear. With recurrent otitis media, these air cells get destroyed, and then you have the unsafe ear, which is the atic perforation. Now, atic perforation, as the name suggests, it is at a much higher level, and usual normal otoscopic examination also one may miss. So it is important that if the drum is normal, to tilt the otoscope higher up towards 12 o'clock position to see the atic and detect an atic perforation. The X-rays will show you destruction, and these are known to cause complications or problems. So when we do an X-ray with a cholesteatoma, we see a radiolucent shadow. From the external auditory canal, you can see the cholesteatoma has grown into the mastoid cavity and a radiolucent shadow is seen in an otherwise sclerotic mastoid. This either could be a cholesteatoma or an operated cavity if there is no history of surgery done. So this is a destruction which you see on a plain X-ray, and if there's any doubt left, you can ask for a CT. A CT would show you, you can compare it. You can see the pneumatic mastoid and you can see the partly sclerotic mastoid, but with a cholesteatoma. This is the cholesteatoma which has destroyed it, and here you can see the mastoid which is normal. 3 forms of mastoidectomy are done: simple, radical, and modified radical, and there are various complications since the ear is closely associated with very much important structures behind. You know that there can be meningitis because you have the dural plate on top. There can be hydrocephalus if the sinuses get blocked, sinus thrombitis, brain abscesses can occur, facial paralysis, dural, extradural abscesses. So a lot of intracranial complications can occur following an atic perforation. So you have a central perforation that you earlier saw, and now we are dealing with an atic perforation. Now, in atic, central perforation does not cause any complications, while an atic perforation can lead to brain infections, meningitis, as I said, sigmoid sinus thrombosis, you can have facial paralysis, etc. The thing is that central perforation is following usually a respiratory tract infection. The discharge is profuse, and usually it is bilateral. So a profuse discharge, bilateral discharge, you don't have to worry. But if it is unilateral, scanty discharge, then one has to always think of atic perforation. So these are the various complications that one may see with an atic perforation, and therefore, if it is an atic perforation, it is important to rule out any intracranial causes like if there is headache, vomiting, blurring of vision, any signs of raised ICT, all need to be tackled at the earliest. Similarly, you may have these patients with ear infections like an atic perforation with fever. So depending on the type of fever, these are all the complications seen with atic perforation, which may be meningitis, or the fever may be normal within 24 hours, typically with sinus thrombosis, or hypothermia with a brain abscess. Then another complication that can occur with a cholesteatoma or an atic perforation is a mastoid abscess, where the cholesteatoma is not a tumor, but it behaves like a tumor. It destroys the mastoid bone, and it has come out from the subperiosteum and caused an abscess. So the diagnosis is if the pinna is shifted laterally and the postoral groove gets obliterated, if there is severe tenderness, immediate incision and drainage is required, and at a later date, a mastoidectomy is to be done to prevent the dangerous intracranial complications. Again, a complication with ear infections like acute otitis media may be common, like causing facial paralysis. Now, the facial gets affected very often with the ear. So, primarily, the facial nerve is an otologic disease because 90% of the facial nerve lies within the temporal bone. It's the longest nerve in a bony canal. That's why you find Bell's palsy more, which is typically called as entrapment syndrome. And if you also notice the course of the facial nerve, at many places it alters its course by 90 degrees, which means all traumas also, whether iatrogenic or otherwise, involve the facial nerve. It is in continuity with a lot of important structures like from the CP angle to the parotid to the middle ear, and these make the facial more vulnerable. So facial paralysis or lower motor neuron facial, what we call, is typically a complete paralysis on one side. Congenital, it may be birth trauma as the mastoid is not developed till the age of 2 years. So even a forceps delivery can cause it. Bell's palsy, as I said, is an entrapment syndrome. Acute otitis media, as nearly 50% of the children have a dehiscent horizontal part of the facial that leads to facial paralysis. And it could be even a cholesteatoma in the adults later. So treatment is treatment of the cause. Whatever the cause you find out requires to be treated. In the older patients, if they have a hearing loss, which is sensory neural and typically unilateral, along with vertigo or imbalance, always you need MRI to be done. And MRI that is with contrast, you can see the imaging and enhancement. And typically this is a CP angle tumor, which is commonly called an acoustic neuroma, and but rightly called a schwannoma, vestibular schwannoma. So pure tone audiometry, where we do the test of hearing of all these patients. Now, if it is an acoustic neuroma or a neural, you'll find the air conduction and both conduction both together. If it's a central perforation, typically you will find a conductive loss. Difference between the air conduction and the bone conduction, as I said earlier, air conduction is much better than the bone conduction. And if both of them are together, it's a normal ear. So these would be the results with audiometry. Then impedance audiometry tells us the exact condition of the middle ear. And this is one of the most reliable tests, which gives us a normal graph as the movement of the drum. If there is fluid in the ear, which we saw as a glue ear or serous otitis media, you see flattening of the graph. You see a negative graph if it is the eustachian tube block. So it's an early otitis media. And if the ossicles are damaged, typically the incus, it shows us a disjoint peak. So it's used a lot for detecting middle ear conditions and for even speech and learning disabilities. So these are the classical results that we find with a normal ear, with fluid inside, with the eustachian tube getting blocked, with otosclerosis, or with ossicular discontinuity. This is the exact condition of the ear can be found out using it. Highly underutilized test, but a very useful test. Takes just few minutes, does not cost a lot, totally non-invasive, and can be done in even infants or even newborns. The other thing is OAE, or otoacoustic emissions, which test the outer hair cell function of the cochlea. This ideally is a test which should be done for every newborn, and in many countries it is done for every newborn. Again, a test which just takes 2 minutes. Mandatory in newborns in all countries, but we do it for high risk because the load is quite a lot. In the general hospital, this costs 200, 300, 400 rupees. But very important test, where the best part is that the result of the test of an OAE is either pass or refer. So usually when you get a test like this, there's a discrepancy as far as the results are concerned. Here the result shows pass, that means everything is normal. Even children who have, we do it routinely for high-risk babies like those who are from the NICU, those who are on ventilators, they've been given aminoglycosides, those who have had meningitis, or even babies who are going in for adoption where they want to know whether the hearing is perfectly normal or not. Now, if a OAE, which is actually a screening test, shows refer, I mean not pass, then after 3 months, we do a BERA. BERA is evoked response audiometry or brain evoked response audiometry, and it can be done at any age, and it is a must for high risk babies. So typically when we do a BERA, it picks up 7 waves, and these waves denote the passage of sound from the cochlear nerve to the cochlear nucleus, superior olivary body, lateral lemniscus, inferior colliculus, medial geniculate body, and the brainstem for the last 2. So what stage the disease is and what is the actual physiology of the hearing is detected by BERA. So we had done a long time ago a small test where we had just reviewed the BERA children, and 41% of them tested to have hearing loss. But this was, of course, not a routine population, a high-risk population, which we had tested. But only 3.1% of them had complaints of hearing. Rest had not even complained of hearing. So the great difference between those complaining hearing, and they were all labeled as the idiopathic developmental delay. Now you see the auditory cortex. Auditory cortex is developed at the age of 6 months. It's already there at birth. Now, if you remember, the inner ear is the first fully formed organ in the human body, in the fetus. And in the fetus, the inner ear is fully formed at midterm. Much before the fetus is viable, the inner ear is formed. So it is the first formed organ in the body, and at birth also the auditory pathway is formed. So at 6 months it is well formed, and by 2 years you can see that practically the whole auditory pathway is in place. So this is just to show you that why we require to act soon. Now this is the age for implantation, where if the ear is damaged, there is a profound sensorineural hearing loss. Why you require to do it at an early age? The reason is that the infant's brain is already pre-programmed, and these are certain, there is neuroplasticity in this, which requires to mature. Unless we thaw them, this will not come back to normal and the pathway will be destroyed. So the auditory system will mature only with sound, and this sound production is required to be given at a right age, that is an early age. Now you have the cochlea, the outer hair cells and the inner hair cells, and from here you have the auditory fibers, as you saw in the pathway of BERA, going to the brainstem. In the brain we have 2 areas, which is called as the hearing center and the visual center. Now what happens that for the hearing center to develop, if the pathway does not mature, the hearing center is taken away by the visual center, and the hearing center does not develop, natural hearing center does not develop in the brain. So therefore, very important to diagnose early, to allow sound to enter into the ear, and to want the auditory pathway to mature. So what actually is happening is, okay, we'll see the cochlear implant first, which is actually a bionic ear.
A cochlear implant helps people with severe to profound sensorineural hearing loss or nerve deafness. A cochlear implant has 2 parts, an internal part called the cochlear implant and an external part called a speech processor. The speech processor has a small microphone which picks up sounds, turns them into signals and sends them to a transmitter. The transmitter then sends the signals through the skin to the internal implant. The internal implant converts the coded signals into electrical energy and sends them to the electrode array. This stimulates the nerve fibers in the cochlea, and the signals are recognized by the brain as sound.
So classically, this is the fine organ of cottae, which is the organ of hearing, and the hair cells are absent. So this is a sensorineural hearing loss, and this is how the implant gives electrical energy to the nerve fiber. and that sound would then reach the brainstem and the auditory pathway gets thawed. So this freezing can be prevented by just sound, and the sound may be in the form of either a cochlear implant, or also it can be in the form of a hearing aid if not very severe. Typically, like this child, I remember, he was having neonatal jaundice. There was practically no hearing.
Doctor wants to listen to your voice. I'm talking
After
to
an
you, you
implant,
answer me, okay?
they required to be mapped.
Now
They
what
do
you will
mapping
do when you
with
will
them
go?
language, and they start
You will play. And what
speaking, but
else?
not immediately.
What else you will
Maybe a
do?
year, 2 years, 3 years of training, and then you can
Okay,
hear
yesterday
them,
when
when they
where
start
I took
talking.
you yesterday?
It makes such a difference. Studying in school, they have a normal life.
The jungle book. What
But
did you
if
see
they
there?
are not caught at that age, beyond the age of 5, most of the natural speech development is lost. By that I mean that what happens that if a small child at 1 year or 2 years is taught 4 languages, 5 languages, they will speak naturally. But if they go beyond the age of 5 or 6, the natural speech development area, as you saw in the earlier slide, does not develop, and that language has to be taught. Therefore, even today, you may be more comfortable, you'll always be more comfortable speaking in your mother tongue. The reason is the language that you learn at that age has been developed as natural speech. And losing years or even months at the age of 1, 2, and 3 would mean a loss of this throughout life. And it will not only have a child would have speech problems, but even psychomotor skills and all start getting affected. The hearing aids, if the hearing till an implant is put, or even if the hearing loss is not very severe, they can be brought to normal mainstream by using an aid. So typically, we saw 2 types of perforations: dental perforation and a very large one. If it's a very large one or a total perforation, it requires a tympanoplasty. But smaller perforations would heal, and the healed drum, you may sometimes see a white plaque, which is called as tympanosclerosis. This is nothing wrong. This is just a sequelae of an old otitis media, which is a healed drum. This is a small atic perforation which can be missed unless seen for, and later on the small atic perforation leads to a large perforation with destruction of the atic, causing a cholesteatoma or a damage to the ear loss. Now we find a lot of patients coming with ear discharge. They may say, "Kaan behta hai 5 saal se, 10 saal se," nothing would happen. But if you find any patient with ear discharge, with headache, vomiting, fever, giddiness, visual disturbances, blurring of vision, any intracranial symptom, then be aware. These are red flag signs. You would either require to do a CT, MRI, or a tertiary hospital setting would be required, which means that it's an atic perforation and which has gone into complications, intracranial complications. So very important, just have a look into the ear, do an otoscopy. It may take just 2 days to master this. There's nothing, no rocket science, just a torch, glorified torch, where you see the normal drum with a cone of light, or you may see it may be bulging and about to rupture, or you can see even fungus forming in the ear, typically otitis externa, or if a patient has come with some injury, you see a perforation and a small perforation and some blood clots. So the diagnosis will be made within 2 minutes just by having a look into the ear than treating it blindly. Okay, very important in children to know that they respond to sound. However, you may find it, but always ask the parents that they respond to sound and